Today's episode is brought to you by Seltzer Mayberg, our newest sponsor, the attorneys at Seltzer Mayberg. You can find them at onecalllegal.com. That's 1-855-5000-LAW, L-A-W, 1-855-5000-LAW. They handle cases including, but not limited to, car accidents, slip and falls, and traffic tickets with a new 15,000 square foot office on I-95 in North Miami. We work out of that office, actually, and they'll handle cases from all over the state. Call now with 24/7 service for a free consultation. That's onecalllegal.com, 1-855-5000-LAW. Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 Reasons Podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick here at American Airlines Arena. No basketball going on right now, although Heat players are working out in preparation for the draft for the front office, which is Thursday night. We're coming in on a Tuesday. I'm here again with Alphonse Sydney. Check out our last podcast. We got into sort of the Heat's overall direction and what it should be, what type of player they should pick at 13. Didn't sort of deep dive into the specific players. Got into a few of them. If you want to hear deep dives into those players, check out the episode that we did, where I did, with Nekias Duncan, which we did about a week and a half ago, and that is in the library. Also, check out the other podcasts in our network. New episode of 3 Yards Per Carry this week. The Dolphins are off, but those guys are not, so definitely check that out. And our Out for the Count podcast, I keep promoting this because they're getting bigger guests than anybody else in the network. They had Tyson Fury on, they had Triple G on, so check them out for boxing, MMA. And also, we relaunched Fantasy on 5 with Josh Houts, Michael Dutch Sandbeek, and also David Friedman doing some daily fantasy, so that's a podcast that you want to check out. All right, the co-host with me today, Alphonse Sydney. You can find him at Alf954. He's also one of the hosts of Light Skinned Opinions on our network. And what we're going to get into today, the sort of broader context of the NBA, where things are going, and then we'll kind of get into some of the Heat players and what value they might have around the league based on that. So let's start with this. Toronto Raptors are the champions. I don't think that's something we ever thought we would say.
Yeah.
And I think it's proved a few things here. I think the first thing it proved was that every dynasty ends. And we know that. We saw it with the Heat here in their 4th season. Guys get hurt. They get worn down, basically, by sort of the miles, by the attrition on the roster, where you don't have as many players on the bench that you can go to because of the way that the NBA rules work, and it's harder to bring guys in. We saw that fourth year with the Heat, where they were trying to resurrect guys like Beasley and Oden and Tony Douglas because they didn't have the Mike Millers anymore. They didn't have that kind of depth. That happens, sort of the emotional toll of 4 years. And obviously, look, there were some unforeseen circumstances. You don't expect Klay Thompson to get hurt when he did. You don't expect Kevin Durant to go out when he did. So I think that's the first thing, is that Golden State kind of proves, again, that we think nothing's ever going to end, and ultimately
until it ends.
Yeah. And I remember this conversation with Dwayne and LeBron. I remember during their time here, I think it was in the Heat's 4th season here for the Big Three, there was the Bad Boys documentary, 30 for 30. Maybe it wasn't 30 for 30. It was either 30 for 30, it might have been an NBA TV documentary. But basically, in that documentary, they say that everything ends, and I remember LeBron and Dwayne both talking about that the next day. So we'll get into Toronto in a second and kind of what their victory means. But I want to start with Golden State's loss. Everything we've talked about with the Heat over the past couple of years has been, well, take your time, because nobody's winning a championship other than Golden State anyway.
Well, that's what some people have talked about.
Right. Well, let's talk about what you've talked about, because I think that's been the idea, is, this is hopeless anyway, so let's just put this whole thing on hold here for 2 to 3 to 4 years. But we just saw a team in Toronto that kept banging its head against the wall in the playoffs. They made one move, which they traded arguably their best player, who was not good in the playoffs, for a guy who was better than that, but also thinned out their depth a little bit. And they win a title, taking Masai Ujiri, in my view, one of the top 2 or 3, if not the best general manager in basketball right now, takes a big, big risk, and it pays off. What did you take from Golden State losing, and what does it mean for the conversation we had last week about the Heat's direction?
I guess what I take from it is, just like what you were saying, that these dynasties, they always come to these whimpering ends. When you think about Magic that last year against Jordan. I think it was 92. It just these things just come to these whimpering ends. It's not, they don't go out with this huge bang. I mean, the Heat, the way LeBron walked off the court in 2014. Now you just look away. I don't know if Golden State's reign is over. They bring Clay back in March of next year, and they're a 40-win team. They get to 50 wins, and all of a sudden now you have a sleeper at the 6th seed in the Western Conference. I'm not going to say they're completely over, but what it just shows you is that there's never a time. I think sometimes we overinflate these dynasties, and it's not worth even trying, because you look at what Toronto did. Toronto never tanked. Toronto never lost on purpose. Toronto just basically tried and tried and tried. And hey, disgruntled superstar made a move. Bam! Now they're NBA champions. But then you look at the process. You look at Philly, went down to Toronto. You look at Boston, accumulated all these assets over all of these years. What are they? They're about to have absolutely nothing to show for it. They struck out on Anthony Davis. Kyrie Irving's probably leaving. Gordon Hayward, to no fault of his own, has been a bust. They have Al Horford left and a bunch of young guys that might not be as good as we thought they were during that initial playoff run. So it just goes to show you that it's not, I could sit here and a lot of us culture guys could go and run around taking victory laps. Oh, tanking doesn't work. Look what Toronto did. But what it just shows you, there's so many different ways of team building. The idea of a roadblock in your way doesn't mean that you decide, hey, well, let's just tank for the next 5 years because Golden State's going to win everything.
Yeah, and I think if you look at Toronto and you look at the way it was built, Kawhi is there because they hit with DeRozan. Now, that was pre-Ujiri. I believe that was Colangelo. But they hit with DeRozan. They made a move for Lowry, which at the time, they ended up re-signing him. Remember the summer of 14, where people thought maybe he might sign in Miami and compliment LeBron. But they hit with Lowry at a time where it was unclear kind of if Lowry was the kind of guy you wanted in your organization. Like, there were a lot of issues about him in other places. Was he really an elite point guard? So there's a question there. Siakam, where they got him, absolute steal. That's Ujiri. Van Vliet, okay, another guy, a core rotation piece for them that was coming out of college, was like, is this even a pro?
Who was crucial to their championship.
And as they thinned out their depth, because they had to give up some players to go forward, and some others that they thought would be factors like Anunoby and others were not, and yet they end up winning a championship. They made a move for Ibaka that at the time seemed a little bit risky. The Gasol move, again, strike when you can. They built in a very, again, through the middle, but then expanding it in terms of getting the right piece. And then, of course, they got the superstar, but they needed, and this is part of the problem for the Heat. Sometimes to get the superstar, you need a piece that is attractive enough to headline a package, right? And so you go back to, the Heat getting Shaq. Well, they had two pieces that were attractive enough to headline a package. Lamar Odom was coming off a very, very good year. As arguably that year, the Heat's best player. It was Dwayne at times, but a lot of times it was Lamar. Karan was hurt, so he wasn't what he was the year before, but you knew Karan on a good team could be your third best player.
When Karan was on the Lakers, there was a lot of times he was their second best player.
Right.
Scoring 20, 25 points a game. So Karan could play, so they had those pieces.
Yeah, they had those, and then they had a contract in Brian Grant to kind of make the money work. And that's what you need to be able to make this kind of move. And the question for the Heat has been with this group, if you're going to do this through a trade, do you have that piece? Is that piece Josh Richardson? I think the evidence on that is probably not. For most teams, I think Josh, and we talked about this in the last podcast, I think Josh has real value to a team as their third or fourth best player who's just a plug-and-play player. Like, he's going to defend. He's probably going to shoot you 38% from three. That he can handle a little bit, not as well as you like him to. He's a good guy in the locker room. And Josh is a very easy guy to integrate into your organization. But he's not a headliner, I don't think. Justice, I sort of feel like there's more variability there. Like, you either think Justice is the guy or you think he's not the guy at all. Like,
there's not a lot of middle ground on Justice.
No, I think you think he's potentially an A- player or he's a C+ player. Whereas I think with Josh, at this point, he's probably a B, and on a good day a B+. And now, but the one I just don't know, and again, something we discussed in the last pod in more depth, but With Bam, I just don't think we know. I think you see signs, but I don't know if there's a general manager. I don't know that the Heat want to move him. They didn't want to move him last summer. I think they want to move him less now, especially as Hassan's contract gets closer to the end. But I just don't know and the way they talk about Bam is not a player they want to move. Although I always look past that, because a lot of times Pat talks about a player that way because he is thinking that maybe this is the piece that I want to move.
You're raising his stock.
You're raising his stock and making it clear how hard it is to part with a guy that you love this much. I've been through that pattern for 25 years down here. So I think that's possible. But I guess that's the question is there one of those guys that could be a headliner to a package? And if not, then you're still kind of waiting to do the free agent route, which means you're waiting for these contracts to kind of get off the books. One thing I want to touch on also from a league context. I think if you look at the Eastern Conference now, and you made this point, you've got Indiana with Oladipo coming off a serious injury. I love what Nate McMillan's done there. I don't think their talent base is that great, and so I don't know that they're contenders going forward. Boston, you mentioned the window's gone. They had a window there with this group. If Hayward had been healthy, Kyrie had been healthy, okay, maybe you don't even have to make the move for Anthony Davis. They might not have had to make the move for Anthony Davis, but you could have with what you had. They've made a commitment that Jason Tatum is untradeable.
Yeah.
So is he going to be your best player going forward? And if he is, and maybe he's going to be really good, and I like a lot of his game, but I don't think you look at Boston as the serious threat that you did before. Toronto, are they going to lose Kawhi? There's no replacement on that roster for him. I think they are going to lose Kawhi.
Yeah, I think Kawhi's gone as well. And even if Kawhi stays, there's a lot of things that had to come together at the same time. Toronto doesn't feel like a back-to-back championship team to me. They don't. I mean, honestly, would anybody be surprised if they went out in the second round?
Toronto feels to me a little bit like the 2006 Heat.
Exactly.
It's going to be a one-time champion that, I hate to say this, very few people sort of put up in that class. The only reason that they still get some of that is because of what Dwayne did in that finals. Yeah. But nobody thinks of that team. I remember having a conversation with Antoine Walker a couple years ago about them never bringing that team back here to the arena in its entirety. He's like, that would be nice. I don't know how you could get all those guys to come. Okay? I mean, if Jay Will, maybe from Orlando, Pose, you find Antoine. But that was just a team, that was a mercenary team, led by the ultimate mercenary and Shaq, kind of thrown together, and Dwayne rose it to a level that I didn't, because I always take the hit for this. I wrote many columns about how I hated the trades that Pat made that offseason, and Pat called me out between the Eastern Conference Finals and the Finals.
I think a lot of people did, because I think if you ask a lot of Heat fans, I think 2005 was a better team than 2006.
Agreed.
And I wasn't very happy with the moves either, because I just felt like they were Dwayne Wade rib injury. Was it a rib?
Yeah, it was a rib cage injury in Game 5.
Yeah, and that injury, I think they would have went to the finals. I think they would have beat the Spurs. That team to me was better in each and every way than the 2016. But that's what I'm saying with the Toronto team. Like, last year's Toronto team was really good too. So now you got this year's Toronto team, and there's a lot of circumstances that had to come together for them to win. I don't know if this team, if they run the same team back next year, if, like I said, second round exit, conference finals against the Bucks, would you be surprised if they don't make it to the finals?
I was surprised they beat the Bucks this year, so no, I wouldn't. And I don't know what kind of Marc Gasol you're getting next year. Kyle Lowry's logged a lot of minutes the past few years, I think it's going to. Ibaka's on the way down. I mean, now the only question for them is Siakam a superstar? And we'll see. And if he is, that changes the equation. And I trust Masai to put the right pieces. And he obviously, look, when he makes the trade for Kawhi, it's not just, can we win one championship? And you know he's probably leaving. So I'm sure there's another plan. I just don't know how they get there.
But I don't think it's going to happen next year.
Right. I agree.
So
with
they
that.
Might be a one-and-done champion.
Yes, I think so. So the other team you're looking at, the other two teams are Philadelphia and Milwaukee. Now, let's start with Philly. If you look at Philly's situation, I mean, are they going to pay that kind of money for both Tobias and Jimmy when it doesn't seem like Jimmy even really wants to be here? Jimmy wants to be here. Okay, be there. He wants to be here, not there. And then the four of them didn't work all that well together. You haven't loved sort of their structure. So, obviously from a talent perspective, but they also have a relatively young GM in terms of Elton Brand, hasn't been there a long time. And can he steer them through all of this? And, they bring back Brett Brown when a lot of people thought they wouldn't bring back Brett Brown.
The biggest problem with Philly is not Tobias Harris, it's not Jimmy Butler. It's the fact that you have your two best players, or if you want to call them best, it depends on how you look at the team, but Ben Simmons and Embiid occupy the same space. Simmons is... on offense, he's basically a center when you talk about the space he occupies. So if your other best player is actually a great post-playing center, those guys don't work well together. If Ben Simmons can't develop a shot, he needs to go to a team with some 6'9" power forward playing center who can where the 4 and the 5 can shoot and Simmons can operate down low. Because right now, that's the biggest problem with Philly. The biggest problem is that their best two players don't mix.
Yeah.
And are they going to come off of either one of those players? I doubt it.
Right.
So even if they re-sign Jimmy, re-sign Tobias, and spend all that money, which first of all I think it's a joke to spend for that much money for Tobias Harris. Jimmy Butler is another conversation altogether. But like you said, he doesn't want to be there. And you've seen what happens when Jimmy's in a place where he doesn't want to be.
Right. He gets Woj to talk about how he busted the ass of the rest of the team in practice, where Rachel Nichols just happens to be in Minneapolis that same night. Right, and that's a problem I think the Heat would like to have, but don't have it right now. We're going to get to the Heat in a second, right after we're going to take a break here. But Milwaukee, and I think that's the one team that if you look at, you say, all right, surprising that they went out the way they went out, but clearly there's a foundation there because you have a transcendent player, and they've done a really good job, John Horst and his group, kind of putting pieces around. Brooke Lopez is a tough re-sign. I mean, you got him really cheap, and he fit perfectly with what you wanted to do last year. But when you look at Brogdon, when you look at Bledsoe, you look at some of the other pieces, Middleton, maybe they trade Chris Middleton if they get something better, but I think for right now they're fine. But I think, to me, it's Milwaukee and it's everybody else in the Eastern Conference right now.
See, the Bucks do have some of those pieces where they can make that Kawhi Leonard type trade. Because if you have a disgruntled superstar and you have a Chris Middleton, you have a Brogdon, you have a Bledsoe, you have guys that were integral to your team but are also expendable at the same time. You can actually come off of some of those guys and go after a big name. I don't know who that name is, but that's why I think Milwaukee, because Giannis, it's not the same thing with the Raptors where Kyle Lowry is their best player once you take Kawhi out of the picture. With Milwaukee, they have Giannis. So they have a bigger margin for error if they decide to go big or go home, make some kind of big trade. They'll still have Giannis there. So there's whatever you put around Giannis, there's still going to be a powerhouse in the East.
All right. When we come back, what we're going to get into here is the Heat in the context of what's going on in the league, and maybe how some of the things that have happened may make it a little bit easier for the Heat to kind of get out of the financial situation they've been in. We'll get back to our episode in a second. First, I want to tell you about one of our great long-term partners. That's Doral Toyota, and like us at 5 Reasons, they're pure South Florida. You can find all of your favorite Toyota models, whether you're looking for a new, used, or certified pre-owned vehicle. Doral Toyota is located at 9775 Northwest 12th Street. That's 9775 Northwest 12th Street, just a few blocks from International and Dolphin Malls. Experience the Doral difference, which means 4 years of complimentary maintenance and roadside assistance on all new vehicles, in-house financing available for credit-related issues. If you mention 5 Reasons when you call 305-680-1129, that's 305-680-1129, or come into the dealership, you work with a dedicated manager, not a salesperson. Unlike other dealers, Doral Toyota prides itself on an honest and transparent buying process. That's Doral Toyota, DoralToyota.com, or stop in at 9775 Northwest 12th Street. Vamos, let's go. Another great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network is ShipYourCarNow.com. That's ShipYourCarNow.com. These guys can move any car, any boat, any RV, any motorcycle, or any kind of equipment anywhere you need to move it worldwide. You have a business and you need to ship freight or machinery? Call them. College moves, new car, used car, buying the toy you've looked at for a while, make sure you call them. These guys can ship it all. Give them a call or visit ShipYourCarNow.com/5 Reasons. That's ShipYourCarNow.com/5 Reasons. Make sure to mention 5 Reasons on the phone if you call. There's no job too big or too small. Ship Your Car Now moves it all. All right, now what we're going to touch on here is the Heat. And as other teams kind of sort of reconfigure themselves, it creates opportunity. And one of the things that we've talked about is that, the Heat had onerous contracts. And I'm not going to go back and revisit 16 and 17 again. Nobody wants to hear me do it. I have my opinions on it. I think I know why it happened, but it's not really. I mean, it's spilt milk at this point, right? So you are where you are. But one of the things that was always said was, over time, the situation becomes better. You just have to wait it out. So now we're in a position where some of these contracts. Look, we knew, that Hassan was going to be here for the length of his deal. As we're speaking right now, he's not opted in, but everything I've heard is that he's going to. I know there's some social media chatter otherwise. Yeah. Who knows how that happens? But I have somebody who would be a pretty good authority on the subject who told me, Ethan, there's no bleeping chance. Yeah. But we'll see what happens. I mean, things change. You never know. Goran opted in. I think the timing of that was surprising because it does clear the way for him to be traded, which is not something that I thought he wanted. And so we'll get into that. But then you have the other contracts, obviously Olynyk, which I think most people feel is, as long as he's used properly, and I think that was a challenge last year because of numbers, because of other things they were dealing with, that's not a bad contract. And then the other two that I think most people agree have been, which is James Johnson and Dion Waiters. But the point you wanted to make was that some of the things that have happened around the league and just the ticking of the clock may create other opportunity here.
Well, just like because how we're talking about the league is wide open now, right? I think because of what's happened with Golden State, Kevin Durant's probably gone for the entire next season. Klay Thompson's not coming back to the end of I think end of February, early March at the earliest. What we feel about Toronto. I'm sure we're not the only people that feel like Toronto's vulnerable. There doesn't look like there's a powerhouse. Nobody's scared of Houston. Nobody's really scared of LA either. And we could talk about that another time because until they bring in a third guy, I don't trust anything going on with that team. I don't trust them to build anything around those two guys. So with the league wide open, I think right now you're probably going to have a lot of teams that are going to say, well, it's our time to go for it. And if that's the case, you look at what the Heat have, right? A lot of these teams are going to say, what do we need? We need depth. The Heat have depth, right? They have guys on now that were 4-year deals when they were signed are now 2-year really manageable deals. You have Dion Waiters on a 2-year, $24 million deal. Does that sound? It doesn't sound that bad anymore when you put it in that context. And we've already heard the rumors of Golden State bringing in Dion as a stopgap until Klay comes back. And I think you're going to start hearing a lot more of these things when you start talking about even Kelly Olynyk, who I love, who I don't want to go anywhere, but at the same time, it's still a 2-year small contract. James Johnson, if you need a 6th man off the bench, and let's say JJ starts the year off well, and it comes to the trade deadline, and you need a little bit of bench help, that's going to be an attractive option. So I think the outlook that has been so bleak in so many people's eyes, yours included, over the last couple of years, I think it's starting to brighten a little bit when you start seeing the state of the league and start saying maybe we don't have to wait to 2021. Because in my eyes, I say just stand pat, no pun intended, and just wait it out to 2021. But there might be some avenues here because of the state of the league that say, these guys, very, very productive players. One thing that you can't take away from any of those guys that we talked about, they are still productive NBA players. You don't have just albatrosses on your roster. You have productive NBA players on small 2-year deals. They can be very attractive to other teams around the league.
Well, I'll be a slight counter on that. I think that James Johnson, and maybe it's because of the sports hernia and other things that got away from him, but he has been an albatross the last several months. But I'm not saying that can't change. You saw it in him. It's not like he's never had it. He's had it for a very short period of time relative to his entire career. And the other thing is, I wonder if some teams who respect what Spo has done with him may say, I don't know if our guy is going to get that same thing out of him, or I don't know if we can use him quite the same way. So that one still bugs me. But you're right, it's smaller than it was before. As far as, and plus, in the modern NBA, to me, if you're going to be a 4, and playing next to us, if you're going to be a straight 4, I mean, you need to shoot 34+% from 3 to stretch the floor a little bit, and I don't know if that's where he's going to be consistently. But you look at Dion. I mean, it's another situation because here Dion's going to get minutes this year, and that's one of the reasons if he's here, and that's one of the reasons I think they were making such a big point. And Spo, but Pat basically calling him out, okay, and then Spo saying Pat and I are on the same page on this. Like, that was very unusual, the way that was not them being on the same page being unusual, but the public call out that Spo engaged in, because Pat will do that, okay, but it's very unusual for Spoelstra to do that. So they are either, they, I think, recognize how important he is either as a player here or as somebody to move off of, okay, and get something back for, hopefully. Now, you look at, the course of his career, we've only seen it again with him for a smaller sample size, but unlike James Johnson, who was a first-round pick, but unlike James Johnson, he was a top 5 pick, and there was considered to be this kind of ability that you could get it out of him more consistently. So, and he's younger than and they had 6 2 guards last year, and now they have 2.
Yeah.
And so the minutes will be there for him here, and so maybe you can this year rehabilitate him. I thought it was crazy to think you could last year. Too many bodies here, him getting in the way of other guys who should be playing, him getting in the way of Dwayne's last season.
Yeah.
It wasn't going to work. But like this year, I do think that that's doable. I think Olynyk would be very attractive to a lot of different teams because he's another plug-and-play player.
Yeah.
You put him in, you know what he's capable of, you know he doesn't get in the way, he's not going to be a great defender, but he's not going to kill you positionally. He's, offensively, you can run stuff through him. He's a pretty good three-point shooter, especially for a big. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff that he's a high IQ player. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with him. So perhaps, he is movable. But for me, all of it comes down to this. How much do they value their current young players? What do they think the upside is with them? And on the previous pod, we talked about the 13th pick, and that both you and I agree, if they're going to keep it, it needs to be for a high upside guy. You're not shooting for a B or a B plus. You're shooting for an A, and if you get an F, okay, you get it.
Not a big deal.
It's not a big deal. But you have to be okay with taking the big risk, and you have to have something to sell. And I think this is generally what we're talking about with South Florida sports in general, is that there's just, look, the Dolphins brought in a quarterback who arguably was the worst quarterback in the league last year, and people are excited as hell about it, right?
Because it's something different. It's
something different, and it's something new, and it's something to sell. And look, I mean, there's just isn't enough of that, and the Heat needs that piece. They need somebody at Summer League that people are going to be following. They need somebody that you think, okay, and again, the guys we've talked about, a Bull, again, positionally, they have so many guys at that spot they'd have to clear out. But you look at a Kevin Porter Jr., if they draft a Kevin Porter Jr., if he's there at 13 and they take him, I think, Summer League becomes interesting.
Yeah.
It's what is his upside?
But you also have Nasir Little, which I think will excite some people. Bull, I know people are excited about him. I think it's a gimmicky thing. I don't see that as a. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't see him. I don't see the frame there.
Right.
To take an 82 game NBA season. I just really don't. So I think it would. Yeah, I think it would get people excited and people would watch. But I don't see that as a future piece or a future All-Star. So, and then we talked about some of the other guys, some of the more safer picks. I think we're both in agreement. It's just not time for.
Well, the guy who symbolizes that is Brandon Clark to me, and I know there's guys in the network who really like him, and I like him as a player, and I think Brandon Clark, from what I've seen of him, could be the type of guy who could be a starter on an excellent team. But is he ever going to be one of your 3 best players? I don't know. I don't know if that upside is there, and that's where the Heat, I think, have to get away a little bit from what has been the conventional approach here, which has been, let's get the guy who's played in college the longest, who's the safest possible guy. Let's go get, the Josh Richardson, who worked out very well, the Norris Cole, the Mario Chalmers, who we saw in a championship game. Now, a lot of these guys worked out, okay? But I think this time, but again, we talked about the Wayne Simeons and the Tim Jameses, if you go way back, and the Shabazz Napier, who is a functional NBA player now, but is never going to be a star. Can you get the star? That's what they need right now.
At the end of the day, one of the things I would say, though, and I put this on Twitter and I caught some flack, but I also had a lot of agreement that just no matter who they pick, there's been a track record here, and I think people hold on to this thing of the Heat don't draft well. I think we have to get away from that.
No, the Heat don't draft much, right?
No, but there's also Heat don't draft well. I mean, right. People still bring up the Wayne Simeons and certain draft picks from back in the day because we haven't had that many, so there hasn't been a big of a sample size.
Right.
Now there's a larger sample size. When you look at what they've done recently with their draft picks, the Heat have done a great job.
They've outperformed. The Bam pick has outperformed the draft slot. The Josh Richardson has vastly again, I've talked third in terms of value over replacement player from his draft. He was drafted 40th. I think if you look at Justice, I think the number now is it's either 6 or 7 of the 9 guys drafted ahead of Justice are not on their first team anymore. And it's not because they moved in free agency. It's because it's Okafor. It's the guy they've been dumped. Stanley Johnson. They're not on their first team anymore.
Oubre.
Right. So I mean, Oubre may turn.
He was
after. But if you look at all the guys that were taken ahead of him, Porzingis is not a first team. He's the one that you're like, okay, that's a legit guy that moved. But the rest of them moved because their teams didn't want them anymore. And so I think you look at the 3 guys, like we can talk all day about what the limitations are of Bam, Justice, and Josh. But they did at those draft slots get guys who have outperformed their draft slots. I think Justice is just starting to, but I think Bam already is, and Josh clearly has. So, and then you've got a guy in Derek Jones Jr. who, I agree with them now. I think if he redrafted his draft, he would have been kind of in a 20s.
I think he would have been top 15 pick.
Possibly. I think if you look at that draft, but he would have at the very worst in the 20 to 25 range. And so they've done very well in terms of that core. So when we say, is there a superstar in the bunch? Maybe there isn't, but that doesn't mean there aren't really good NBA players in the bunch, and so they have drafted well. But the problem has been they haven't drafted enough. It's not being bad at it. It's not valuing it enough, at least at the very top level of the organization. I do think that that's changed some, but look, and I don't want them to shortcut the process either. All I want them to do is come out of 13, and I don't want to hear, this is a guy we think, and they won't say this, but I don't want to hear this from other people maybe off the record. This is a guy we think, is going to develop into a core rotation guy for us and give us 25 minutes. That's not what I want. What I want to hear is, this is a guy we think can be a star in the right circumstance, and maybe it won't work out, but we think he can be a star, and if you can get that guy, that's what you do now.
Because, and I said it last podcast, you have enough solid players.
Right.
You have a whole roster full of really solid guys. Bringing in a Brandon Clark right now, just to me, is just another solid individual. What you really need to do is take the swing for the fences.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, if it fails, it fails. Right? It's almost, you're at this point that you have so much goodwill with the fan base. If you do take a big swing and you miss, I really feel like people are gonna say, okay, well, at least they tried to go big or go home. So at the end of the day, I trust whoever they pick, because I've watched the last few years and I see that we've had we've had some picks in the teens and even in the second round that have worked out really well for the team. But at the same time, I do want to see them go for the Kevin Porter, the Nasir Littles, so the playmaker, the impact guy, the guy who could be the difference for the next 5 years.
And trust the culture. If you talk about the culture so much, this is what the culture should be about. The culture is not just, okay, we can make an NBA player of Rodney McGruder. That's great, and it's great to have those guys as your 8th through 12th guys, okay, and as your sort of, they're the guys, break glass in case of emergency, or plug them in and they'll give you decent minutes. But to me, if the culture is what they believe it is, the culture is taking a guy who could be a diamond, but he's a little rough, okay, and turning it into a diamond, not trying to create something, and my analogies are terrible, I don't write as much as I used to, but like trying to create something where you're getting a dime out of it. Like, no, it's, and okay, you can use the dime, okay, no, you need to find core. You need to find somebody to build this thing around, and if you go and you fail, it's okay.
And I will say, what I will say for the guys that they have drafted, and for the locker room that they have right now, that a guy with quote-unquote off the court issues, I think they have the guys in Justice, Jay Rich, Bam, JJ, Udonis is still around the team. I think they have a locker room that could take one of these, a young kid with maybe some off the court stuff, and mold him and bring him right into the culture. So I don't think they need to shy away. Oh, this kid has a little rough background. I think they have the guys that are young enough in that locker room that can relate to him, but are also seasoned enough that they can bring him into the mold and kind of make sure that, hey, listen, this is how we do things here. This is how we do things in Miami, which is probably one of the biggest things of Dwayne coming back for the last year and a half. Because those kids got a healthy dose of Dwayne, healthy dose of UD. So you got to trust that the Heat culture that you've instilled in those guys will rub off on anyone else you bring into the locker room.
The best quote I got on that topic was Kyle Korver once told me. He said, every locker room can take one knucklehead. You just can't give him a buddy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, and go back to, and we love him, but go back to 2008, and that was kind of the issue. They didn't like Beasley and Chalmers hanging out so much together because they thought Beasley was having a bad effect on Rio.
Yeah.
And it was sort of when Beasley cleared out and Rio was with guys like, Chris Bosh and Mike Miller, that it was like, oh, okay, the light went off, right? And they're like, okay, but that's the premise here, and I do think you're right. I think they can handle it. All right, we're gonna have more Heat content, NBA content during the week. Probably we'll get into the Lakers a little bit more at some point. But both Alf and I are gonna be out here at the draft on Thursday night. We're gonna pod as soon as the pick is made. So we're gonna pod. We're gonna do like 10 minutes. We're gonna send it to you, send it out. We're gonna get it produced. We're gonna get it up. This is the way we're going to do things now, and you'll get more podcasts from us going forward, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Fire Arena Podcast. Thank you so much.